There's a spider living in my bathroom. She's tucked between the mirror and the light bulb. She seems to make her way confidently around her messy web, carefully adding new silk where her home needs reinforcing, clearing it a feast from the day before, shedding her exoskeleton, leaving smaller versions of herself behind. I'd been admiring her for a couple of days before I introduced her to my sister. Ew. Her reply was drawn out and dry. Squinting at the light bulb, she finally asked, "Can you kill it?" "No, she's just hanging out. I want to see what she does." "If it comes down, I'm squishing it." I was shocked by my sister's response, but I shouldn't have been. I know how people treat spiders. They're creepy, scary, dangerous. They're designed to be squished under our feet, our textbooks, screamed at before they arrive at their untimely death. But I wanted to protect the spider living in my bathroom. I've grown attached to her small web and even smaller, spindly legs. She determined that my bathroom, my mirror, and my light bulb were the best place for her to survive. To feast, to shed her skin, to live, and I would not deny her that. I've been on hormone replacement therapy since November 2nd, 2020. Every Monday night since then, I have followed a very specific routine. I take out an alcohol wipe, a 25-gauge needle, an 18-gauge needle, a Band-Aid, and a teeny bottle of testosterone from the small brown treasure chest I keep it all in. I clean the top of the vial with the wipe. The smell of the alcohol singes the air. I use the 18-gauge needle to extract 0.3 milliliters of testosterone from the vial. I replace the needle with its 25-gauge partner, pushing out any pesky air bubbles, flicking the syringe endlessly. I pinch the fat of my stomach, cleaned with the same wipe. I try not to think too hard about this step. I put a Band-Aid on the sore spot, and I go to bed. The ritual stays the same, but I change. I started, partly, because I wanted my body to change. I wanted my body to walk in tandem with a part of myself that wasn't visible to those around me. But the reason I started, truly, was because I wanted to live. I began to shed the exoskeleton of childhood when I was 8. That's when I noticed myself peering down onto the girls I played house with, always the husband. But that wasn't the only change I noticed. Walking home from school, maybe 100 feet away from my grandma, I heard a voice. Out of time and out of place, strangely southern and dangerously close. The voice called out, "Oh my!" I turned around to see a sweaty, middle-aged man, a thick black mustache, beady eyes concealed by enormous glasses, and a bicycle made to look like reeds of bamboo. Before I could begin to process what I was seeing, I mustered the closest approximation of a glare my little body could muster. This seemed to surprise him. He yelped out, "You're a child!" My purple glittery backpack might have told him that sooner. Before cycling away, he left my grandma with a half-hearted warning. He chuckled, "You better watch out for that one. She is going to grow up fast." My grandma responded the way she always does when a stranger assumes she speaks English. She laughed and nodded, hoping the conversation would end there. The only solace my parents could offer was always stay close to your grandma and don't go outside by yourself. This confirmed the hunch I'd been forming. My body wasn't mine. My body changed the way the world saw me, the way people treated me, and I was the one that needed to act accordingly. I was pissed. Despite my best efforts, my childhood was over. But I was not ready to be a woman. The woman my family imagined I'd be, the one I was supposed to be, became blurrier. I assumed at the time that it meant I wouldn't live long enough to become a woman. For 10 years, I lived in limbo, unable to commit to life or death. I didn't want to die exactly, but feeling far away from my body and being unable to imagine a future for myself will make a guy wonder, how is it going to happen? I learned in middle school that what I was feeling was called suicidal ideation. The constant preoccupation with death was almost textbook. I couldn't get into a car, walk down the stairs, or sit down for class without imagining a dramatic scene that would end everything. Never a plan, never an action, but accidents happen all the time. Why couldn't one happen to me? When I discovered my spider, I wanted to know more about her. The common house spider, Parasteatoda Tepidariorum. Nearly every website I found decided to forego information about her origins, her behaviors, habits, and her life cycle. Instead, I was inundated with information on how to exterminate her. Her nature meant that her life would be precarious, dependent on whether or not I found her too scary to live. I knew about trans people. I also knew how they were treated. Movies and TV shows made jokes out of women with deep voices and Adam's apples. In high school, a boy in my class called it a mental illness and said that they were perverts. I heard about higher rates of murder and suicide. I wondered if these things were connected. Does my spider know what people say about her? Does she think that she's scary? I hope that she doesn't care. There was no epiphany to my transness, not one single moment when I realized why I cared so much. Putting the pieces together was a slow, repetitive process. I had entered into a cycle of denying, wondering, imagining, and then fear. Maybe I'm just self-conscious. Plenty of chubby girls are. Maybe if I just did my makeup and wore a skirt, I could feel like a girl. What would it feel like to be someone's boyfriend? What does testosterone do? Could I really look like that? Everyone would know. It would never be real. While I was agonizing over my own gender, my best friend was going through the exact same thing. The funny thing about being a queer kid is that when you finally get the chance to figure yourself out, you find that the people you've chosen are in precisely the same boat. Ronnie was the first to say anything, and thank God he did. How long would I have spent stuck in that loop if I hadn't been knocked out of it? The gender feelings reached a boiling point my freshman year of high school. I wanted to let my friends in. I couldn't stand being alone with myself anymore. I wanted it to be casual. I couldn't handle a teary coming out. Why should a fresh set of pronouns change anything? The pep talk could have gone on for just as long as the denial cycle, if I let it. Lunch is casual. I could do it during lunch. By the way, I've been thinking that I want to use she and they pronouns. By the way, you can't be vulnerable if you start your coming out with, by the way. She also didn't last very long. I think they must have seen right through me. Like I was a scared animal. They said, nice, nice, nice. Is Marianne still good? I hadn't gotten that far. I wouldn't for another 4 years. My friends provided a comfortable landing zone. I could confide in them in ways I never could with anyone else. I cut my hair, another exoskeleton left behind. The suicidal ideation didn't end when I came out to my friends, but I started to get something back that I thought was gone, a future. My siblings were the next to know. My brother and sister were old enough. My brother and sister were old enough to understand what I meant when I told them I was really a boy, but young enough not to care. My brother was just excited not to be the only boy in the house. This was exactly the response that I needed from them. I was finally 18, and I got to decide what my future looked like. But I felt I needed to tell my parents the good news. Telling my parents was its own challenge. I decided to divide and conquer. I would tell them separately. My own resistance to vulnerability meant that the first coming out happened driving up the 5. When you're driving, eye contact isn't an option, and that was perfectly fine by me. It was quiet and gentle, exactly what I hoped it would be, but couldn't bring myself to expect. The second coming out wasn't so quiet. I did it after I started hormone treatments. I wouldn't let anything be said that could divert me from the path I had chosen. I already paid for the stuff. The anger and resentment that had been bubbling inside me for years couldn't help but make an appearance. My mom couldn't help but ask, "Is it the testosterone that made you so angry?" In reality, testosterone has only made my life fuller. I thought it would be the finish line in a 10-year journey to getting my body back, but it has only been the beginning of a new and complex relationship with my changing self. I had finally committed to staying alive, if only to see what I could do with a body that was totally mine. The metaphor of a caterpillar entering its chrysalis and emerging a beautiful butterfly came up frequently. If only it were that easy. If I could have entered into a humongous chrysalis, turned all my skin and bones and organs into goop, and emerged months later a gorgeous hunk, I totally would have done that. But that isn't how people work. Transition is an exercise in vulnerability. There is no hiding from the world. My voice cracked for what felt like years. I had the appetite of a teenage boy. I had a shitty, wispy little mustache, and using the past tense is generous. My grandma asks why I won't shave, and she nods and laughs when I tell her I don't want to. I laugh too. My nature makes my life precarious, dependent on callous legislatures and propagandized voters who think that I'm a threat, that we're a threat. Having autonomy over your body isn't a threat to anything worth protecting. Should fear mean that we're not allowed to live a life that makes us happy? My spider isn't a threat up in her wispy home, but when push comes to shove, she does bite back.